Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another thrilling, exciting episode of JavaScript Jabber. I am Steve Edwards, the host with the face for radio and the voice for being a mime, but I'm your host today because Dan didn't want to do it. Speaking of Dan, he is here with my panel with me. How you doing, Dan?
I'm doing really well on the personal level.
Good. Dan is coming from Tel Aviv. I am here in the Portland area where Mount Hood is getting dumped on with snow, which is great for us skiers. Yay! Although the winds are like 40 miles an hour too, so it makes it sort of hard to go down instead of across. But anyway, our guest today is Mr. Michael Hablich. I think I sort of said it right. I think that had more of the Hebrew accent than German. But how you doing, Michael?
Hi, I'm doing well. Thank you very much.
And you are coming to us from Austria, correct?
Yeah, that's right. I'm based in Austria, and there I work as the product manager for Chrome DevTools and Puppeteer. Essentially, I think a lot about testing and debugging web applications.
Alrighty. So you work for Google, am I?
Yeah, that's correct. I work in the Chrome team at Google.
Excellent. Talk about getting stuff right from the horse's mouth. Doesn't get any better than that. All right. So as he mentioned, we are here to talk about one of my favorite topics, which is debugging in the Chrome DevTools. For someone like me who came up starting with PHP, where I had Xdebug on the server and I could debug the crap out of anything with my breakpoints and profilers and stuff. It was when I started writing first AngularJS and then Vue on the front end. The DevTools and debugging became one of my better friends. So I'm all about debugging and how to troubleshoot and debug things on the front end. So where do you want to start, Michael?
That's a good question. So we can start at PHP because I also started a program with PHP like years ago.
So I'm the only one here who's never really programmed in PHP. Oh, interesting.
Wow. I'm impressed. How did you dodge that bullet? Great tag, super useful. I got it all the results, and oh my god, I would never ever want to use the applications I wrote 20 years ago. So
and by the way, just so you know, I think that PHP kind of got its start it didn't get its start in Israel, but it got a significant push in Israel.
Mm-hmm.
Like one of the first versions of PHP was actually implemented by two Israelis.
Is Rasmus one of them, or not?
It's Zend. The guy. They're the guys that created Zend Technologies.
All right. Okay. Yeah. That's still, you see that as an option in like PHP Storm is using the Zend debugger as compared to, that's the other option other than Xdebug. Anybody remember real quick what PHP initially stood for?
Personal homepage, I think.
That's right. It was just, it was like Drupal. It was like, heck, anything else. So someone started out, hey, I want to do this for myself. Oh, look, this is cool. Everybody else likes it. Let's watch it go.
I did manage to dodge PHP, but I didn't manage to dodge ASP and JSP. So, yeah. So, I didn't dodge that bullet completely. I did want to say, though, that I'm the one who invited Michael on and really wanted to talk with him because I think for me, first of all, I for two big reasons. One is that a lot of goodness is recently coming out of Chrome into the Chrome out of Google into the Chrome DevTools. I see like features coming fast and furious, and I'm really happy with all the advancements that are being made there. But it really goes for me beyond that, because for me, the debuggers that are built into the browser are like the big reason that web development has been able to advance so much. Like, we take these tools for granted because they're built in, because they're ubiquitous, but like, you can't imagine how the world would have been without them. And I sort of can because I was there at the time, and debugging with alerts and stuff like that. And it's I really can't imagine modern web development without the various debuggers and development tools that are built into modern browsers. And personally, I like using DevTools the best. So that's the one that I mostly use when I have a choice.
That's very nice of you to say.
So Michael, let's start with history, I guess, of the DevTools. And I know from back early 2000s, I can remember the first thing I ever remember seeing that was like this was Firebug in the Firefox browser. And I think that predates the Chrome DevTools. I could be wrong. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So I don't know if Firebug was the first. I guess Netscape and so on also had the debugger. I can't recall.
I think Internet Explorer had a debugger before Firebug. But
that's just the first one that I recall.
I'm not sure, to be honest.
I mean, at that point, it was a blurry line, also using Visual Basic and so on to debug your web applications because you had all those nice ActiveX content.
Mm-hmm.
So, but yeah, Firebug for sure was first. And as far as I can recall, when Chrome actually was released, there was already DevTools included.
Okay, that sounds right.
And one of the really cool things about the Chrome DevTools that, again, I don't know if a lot of our listeners realize, is that it's actually implemented in JavaScript and HTML and other web technologies.
That's correct, which is also essentially when people start talking about debuggers or about Chrome DevTools or Firebug and so on, they need to realize it's actually going to be two main components. One of them is going to be the introspection capabilities for the runtime, which is like exposing what's currently happening in runtime, so all the information, the backend essentially. But you're on the other side, you're also going to have the front end because you need to surface that information somehow to the user, give the user a way to control breakpoints and so on. And that particular front end, for example, in Chrome DevTools or in Chromium DevTools is written in, nowadays it's in TypeScript. I think we migrated to TypeScript 2 years ago or something like that, or 3 years.
Wow,
from JavaScript to TypeScript.
That must have been a really big rewrite.
Yes, it was. I mean, it changed a lot of files and a lot of lines of codes, of course. So we did actually tried doing it in small chunks, but then it was like also not great. So we actually had hackathons where we changed bigger chunks of the code and so on. But yeah, that took a lot of time. But TypeScript is simply more ergonomic to develop a web application like that.
How many people, by the way, if you can say, work on the Chrome DevTools inside Google?
Let's say it's roughly 20-ish, something like that, yeah. So including software engineers, UX designers, UXR people, PMs, program managers, and so on. That's roughly 20.
And you, like I mentioned before, you release features really fast and furious. I mean that literally every time a new version of Chrome comes out, which is what, like every month or two?
Every month, yeah.
Every month. I see like you guys coming out with a video about the new features and capabilities that you're adding into it. So how are you able to add so much capabilities into the DevTools at such a rapid pace?
Right. So quick shout out regarding the videos. I forgot our DevRel people that are also working on the team that are creating those content. And yes, I really like the videos. They are so great. And also that's what our users actually are also telling us, like the videos are great. They're super useful for them to actually get to know about the features.
Now, what videos are these? Where are they at?
What's new in DevTools? I think the cadence now is every 2 months we're releasing a new one or something like that. I need to check. Or maybe it's for each major version nowadays.
By the way, in the Chrome DevTools itself, when you open it in the drawer, it will actually tell you what's new and have a link to that video. So you can actually get at the video from inside the Chrome DevTools.
Yeah, that's correct. And this also has like release notes more or less, like this feature showcase that's linking to, that's probably a playlist.
It is. I didn't notice it. Oh my God.
Oh yeah, that's really useful. Like if you have like 8 minutes or something like that every month, and you look at that, you will see all the latest features. How we do that? Yeah, I mean, it's a constant evolution. So the debugger always needs to adapt to how the debugging target is also changing. What I'm saying is the web platform constantly changes. In particular, Chrome constantly changes, so exposes new APIs, or APIs are going to be changed and so on. That requires a certain amount of maintenance on our end to also make sure that we're not breaking, which is taking up quite a lot of capacity, honestly, because there's a lot of churn, and we need to keep having hold on those issues. And how we select what we are going to work on next, that depends heavily on feedback we get from developers, but also initiatives that we know that are important to us. Like, for example, core web vitals and performance debugging. We know, we have the case studies that this is important, that this is really going to change the conversion rate. So we are investing a lot in performance debugging to make that more, let's call it more efficient. So essentially that you get more bang for the buck out of your time invested as a developer. Or similarly, network debugging, which this year we want to take a deeper look into network debugging, network panel, for example, that because nearly every DevTools user out there is using network panel one sort or another for performance debugging or for network debugging why something doesn't show up, or and so on and so on. So network panel is used quite often. And for this year, we actually said, okay, we are going to take a deeper look and what we can improve there. So there, which is not easy, because if you ask two people which of the changes is better, you get two answers. So very often it's finding a good middle ground, or opening up, or don't find the middle ground and providing capabilities to make it configurable, what is best for the user.
Although there's this maxim that I've heard like a while back, which says that every checkbox you see in an options dialog is two product managers fighting and couldn't decide who's got the right opinion. So they said, let's just make it an option. And then of course you start fighting over what should be the default. But that said, so you said that you get a lot of the decisions are actually driven by community feedback. How do you actually get that feedback? If I have certain ideas for things that I would like to see in Chrome DevTools, I think, hey, I think they can make the network tab so much better if they do X. Like, how do I send this feedback over to you, or suggestions or whatever?
Okay, so the most straightforward thing is open Chrome DevTools, and there's this hamburger menu, the three dots menu. There's help, and there's report a DevTools issue. That is going to open our issue tracker, and there you can submit a bug or a feature request. And that is regularly triaged. So we have SLOs to actually go over this list and actually triage those.
So it's not just issues, it's also suggestions and
yes.
requests and stuff like that. Cool.
Yes. So an issue is like either a feature request or a bug. The triage process should hopefully categorize them correctly, because it also depends. For some users, a feature request is actually, they perceive it as a bug, which is fine. Yeah, that takes some conversations.
And when are you going to integrate AI?
That's a good question.
How would you see the DevTools integrating AI, Dan?
I was just joking. I mean, okay. AI is everywhere.
I'm just trying to think, how would you use that? I guess I could see some applications, but I'm not sure.
I mean, we obviously are talking with web developers about how they are using AI. Like, ChatGPT or Gemini and so on for web development tasks, which is super interesting. And it's very new. Their results are very nuanced and need a lot of understanding when they interpret the results. So what I'm saying with that is, it's not a magical silver bullet. And for example, you get a result back from your random AI assistant, and you still need to be able to interpret what is coming back, if this is actually correct or not. Because if you can't do that, you could be in a very bad spot. So the quality of responses is actually very important. Having said that, with all those new model updates that are coming in, be it Gemini Ultra, or be it OpenGPT with version 4, all of them are getting more powerful, of course, because you can also apply more information to it and so on. But yeah, judging the quality of the response is super important. That actually requires a certain level of experience from the user to judge that. And so, yeah, there's potential, but it's nuanced.
Yeah. So on a more serious note, though, so as I said, a lot of new features and capabilities being added in. Can you give us a quick overview of, let's say, like a couple of your recent favorite features that made it in, that you're really happy that made it into the product?
Okay. So that is going to, yeah.
I'm stumping you.
No. I'm just thinking how to start explaining that. I think a year ago or something like that, or might be longer, we started tracking down bugs in our how we are treating breakpoints and if we are hitting breakpoints while debugging. Which means sometimes breakpoints were not hit, and sometimes they were hit, and then they reloaded, and then they were hit, but then you didn't reload, and they weren't hit, and sometimes new breakpoints appeared and stuff like that.
Yeah, I'm guessing usually issues come up with virtual code, right?
Yes, that's what. So we did go down that rabbit hole. What's actually happening there? And it turned out, of course, it was a number of issues. Which is, for example, web applications might look the same when you reload, but they might not actually be the same under the hood, because code gets injected, or you might be running an A/B test, and so on and so on and so on. So if you set breakpoints in version A of the application, and now that breakpoint should move to somewhere else because the code, when after you reload, is version B, and it's actually a little bit of different code, the debugging backend actually needs to migrate that breakpoint, and that's not super straightforward.
So basically, you're saying that in an ideal world, you'll be able to somehow magically identify that a particular piece of code has moved down a few lines or moved up a few lines, and then move the breakpoint along with it, instead of just hard coding it to a particular line number in a file.
Right. And there are heuristics that help you there, of course, built into DevTools and other debuggers. There is also technology like source maps that also, again, help you doing that. Yes, and you're saying, ooh, source maps, and I'm saying, yes, ooh, source maps, but it's the technology that we have. And there is actually no standard for that yet, which is going to change, hopefully. Which hopefully is going to then result in a more reliable usage of source maps. Right. Where was I? Yes, source maps. Whatever. Now going back to breakpoints and so migration of breakpoints when you reload, for example. Then we found out, oh yeah, there are a few issues in there, so we fixed those, and then we found new issues, and then we started digging into, well, what if you set a breakpoint, but that breakpoint is in the ignored code section, so you actually don't want to see that. Should it trigger? Should it not trigger? We had, I think, two camps or what in the team, like, no, we should be doing that. No, we should be doing that. Okay, can we answer that somehow with UXR? It's like, oh yeah, let's do that. So we have in Chrome DevTools, we have a process called RFC, request for comments, where we have a GitHub repository, and we are asking the community essentially, hey, we have this hard problem to solve. We know there's different solutions. Please help us identify what they actually prefer or in such cases. So we did that. Yeah, long story short of that is a perfect example of like, wow, the results were split a little bit for preferences. So, okay, what this means essentially is we need to make it configurable because there's no winner. Right. So I found that particular endeavor quite interesting because like very technical, and it was like, oh my God, it's so complicated to think through all of that. But honestly, that's not something that a lot of people, or that's something that a lot of people might be encountering, but might be able to fix with a reload, but still under the hood, something else is happening. So yeah.
So I've been playing around, and I've noticed recently, and I don't know how recently these have been added in, but we were talking about the YouTube channel of all the what's new in DevTools videos, and you were talking about issues. And so if you bring up the DevTools over to the right, you'll notice, if you have any console errors, it'll give you a little red X that shows, you've got one error or a bazillion, which is my case sometimes. And then you'll get another little icon with a triangle with an exclamation mark, and looks like a quote balloon with an exclamation mark. And if you click on those, brings up another little window. And this is really cool. One is labeled What's New, and it has the latest video right there in the DevTools. And this, as we're recording right now, the YouTube channel shows up through number 120, and in the DevTools itself, it has a video on number 121. And it lists a whole bunch of different issues like source map improvements, enhanced performance, and so on. So right within the DevTools itself, you can see what's latest. And then there's an Issues tab. And it looks like there's current issues. Right now, for instance, there's one about a deprecated feature use. Reading a cookie in cross-site context will be blocked in future Chrome versions. Setting cookie and cross-site content won't be blocked in future Chrome versions. So really cool way, I guess, to get, instead of having to go hunt around right there in the tools, you can get to the latest and see what ongoing issues are being addressed. Is that a fair statement?
Yes. So if you're talking about the issues panel, then yes. The idea, the vision for that one is actually to be something like a launchpad where you look at the issues panel and then you can go through a list and fix the issues on the page. Because that was introduced like a few years back, because we have seen a lot of console spam. Everybody was spamming the warnings and errors to the console. So that's the REPL interface that you have in that you have in DevTools that also everybody's using, and it was simply spammed with a lot of warnings and errors. So we moved a certain amount of those errors into something called an issue panel, where you actually can, instead of throwing errors, you can put structured information in there, also with the information, okay, you're facing this issue, that's what they should be doing. Like also with a suggestion or with a link to a web.dev article and so
on. I really like this approach of trying to clean up. Like you said, it's kind of the console had to a certain extent has become this kind of a grab bag of like everything, and a lot of organizations basically even started kind of ignoring it because there was just so much stuff there. By the way, I'm old enough to remember the days when companies would actually post jobs in there. So you would like go into a website, open the DevTools, and says, if you can read that, then we would like for you to apply for a job at our company. I think that's kind of I don't see that happening very much anymore. But that was an interesting time.
I sometimes still see that. What I see more often is messages to end users, not developers, with the content of, you shouldn't be here. If anybody told you to open DevTools and you are looking at this thing, close it right now.
Yeah, I'm guessing, for security reasons, they're worried about the phishing attacks or stuff like that.
Yeah, correct. That's why we also, half a year ago, something like that, we had a little bit of a wall or a speed bump there, where if you are pasting in some code into the console the first time, it's going to reply to you, hey, you're not allowed to do that because for security reasons, essentially. Please type in, I need to check, I'm a developer or something like that. And then actually that feature was enabled, that you can paste code into the console.
Interesting. You mentioned source maps before, and indeed one of my biggest gripes, like forever, with effectively like every DevTools ever that I've ever used, is how kind of problematic or how limited source maps are. Like, they're better than nothing, for sure, but then not always by much. So the lines never actually match up exactly, and when you're in the console, the names of the variables don't match, and stuff like that. So it's a real pain sometimes to debug code when it's like minified and whatnot, and even if you ship the source maps for it. And the reality is that I often do debug in production. So is there anything you can say about that?
Yes, I can say a lot about that. Let me structure my thoughts a little bit about that. Summarizing, yeah, that's what we also see. Like, when you're debugging something, either you're going to have source maps or you're not going to have source maps. And let's go down with the route of you don't have source maps, then the features like pretty print or local overrides are going to be very, very useful for you. And it would be really useful to actually somehow, and you can also attach the source maps afterwards to it and so on. But if you're using source maps and you actually have them available, getting that working correctly is really hard. And it really depends if your technology stack can set it up correctly as default. It turns out that creating good source maps actually takes a lot of time when you're building. So that's why sometimes there are options like speedy or of creating fast creating source maps that are not 100% correct. And that's also, again, I talked about interesting breakpoint bugs that then result in very interesting breakpoints or debugging bugs when you're resolving a variable, for example. We also we encounter, when we do user interviews, we encounter a lot of users that are also running into those problems. Okay, but what are we actually doing in order to improve the situation? On one hand, we are working with TC39 to standardize source maps, because they're not standardized.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I kind of wanted to mention, is that people don't realize that the source maps are something that kind of like happened, rather than being properly designed in with like this really nice process. As I recall, it's some guy just created them, and we're more or less stuck with whatever he created or something like that.
The story is probably a little bit more complicated than that, but yeah, it's not standardized, and that's a problem, of course. So standardization should hopefully, when it's actually standardized, result in a more reliable usage of source maps, and also for stakeholders enable them to actually change the standard and add new features to it. Because right now it's super hard for an entity that for any entity to actually make changes to or additions to the source map spec. Except with the Google extensions and stuff like that. And with the standard, there's actually a way to do that in an orchestrated way.
So the bottom line, is there going to be like a solution for, let's say, using the correct variable names or the original variable names in the console, for example?
Yes, there could be a solution. And I think I need to check. So
you're going to tell me that the solution is already there.
I'm 80%. I think we did something into that direction. Or I know we did something into that direction. I don't know how much of that already has shipped. Yeah, I would need to check that. But yeah, because again, I think we also did some user testing. Was like, oh, but I would expect the opposite as it works.
The problem then is that it's really difficult to, if you're working with the source maps, then you see the original code, but the variable in the console is the minified variable.
Yeah.
It's actually really difficult to find out what the minified variable name that matches what you see in the code is. So you're kind of screwed both ways. It would have been easier to see the original code, or because then at least you would have seen the correct variable names, as it were. But you're kind of stuck in the middle.
Right. It's a good segue into something we shipped last year. Oh yeah, or 1.5 years ago, which is called the authored and deployed mode. So in the source panel, if you can actually switch between the authored code, which is only the source map code, and the deployed code, which is completely ignoring source maps at all. It's showing you the thing at how it's actually deployed on the server.
How do you do that?
There should be a button up there. If there's no button, then you need to enable it in the preferences under experiments. Give me a second.
No.
Oh yeah, under experiments in the settings, group sources into authored and deployed trees. And with that, you can actually switch between the two of them for exactly the reasons you just outlined. Like, hey, actually you're debugging two worlds and you would want to switch. And that's a concept sometime in the future, we want to explore a little bit more. Like, can you switch between those two modes, and what are the implications, like variable resolution, for example?
Or alternatively, maybe show a tooltip, like if you're hovering on top of the variable in the in the source map, at least show the name of the minified variable or something like that. That might be useful as well.
Okay, along the lines of practicality, I'm all about practicality. What I'd like to do is, I'm counting 8 or 9 different tabs. The first 4 are probably, at least speaking for me, the first 4 are the ones that I use the most: the elements, the console, the sources, and the network tabs. So what I'd like to do is sort of walk through those different tabs, different pages within the DevTools, and just sort of go over how you would normally use them, and maybe if you can think of any lesser known feature that you could think would be really useful. So for instance, if we start with the elements tab, right? Okay. The elements basically shows your HTML markup. And then if you click on, for instance, an element over on the side, you can see the CSS that's applied and the layout, what are the computed styles, how are things all put together, and so on.
Okay. So let me also go with a bonus thing there. Okay. So what I'm quite often using is our command palette. So, which means
Command
similar
palette.
to what you have in Visual Studio Code, for example. If you do Shift, I think it's the Option key on Mac and P. You can actually
Shift Command P on Mac.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, Shift Command. Yeah, sorry, I have a combined keyboard here. It's a little bit hard to identify which of those Mac keys it is. And that actually enables you to run all the commands in DevTools. So that's what I'm using quite often if I want to look for something. And that is the segue into when I'm talking about elements. What one feature that I find very useful and is emulate focus page. So essentially, if you are using DevTools, the page is actually losing the focus because DevTools set the focus. But with that thing, you can not let the page lose the focus, which is relevant, for example, if you're debugging some styling problems with hover over menus or something like that, because they will disappear when the focus is lost, for example.
Heck yes. It's like drop-down menus or something like that.
Yeah, right. But I think that one is actually in the rendering drawer or something like that, whatever. But I find it very useful. And the other one in Elements that I more or less use regularly, and I don't debug very often in Elements, I'm not that much into styling, is break on so making DOM breakpoints. So for example, if I want to know, I wonder when that particular element is going to change or is going to be created, I can set a breakpoint there, and then if a new sub-item, for example, is going to be added and filled into that particular element, the execution breaks, and I know exactly what's happening there. They can.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's a lot less useful than it used to be with modern frameworks. I mean, so it breaks in the middle of the React code somewhere. What do you do now? But it was much more useful in the jQuery days. Let's put it this way.
Right, which is also a nice segue to another topic. So previously I mentioned a little bit about ignore lists and stuff. So you can use ignore lists to ignore files and stacks in your stack trace. What this means, for example, typically the inner workings of the React framework, typically you're not going to be interested in that. You're probably going to be more interested in the code that they actually wrote or that they actually have influence and control of. So with ignore lists, you can let those things be ignored in stack traces and in everything else. So that's super useful. And
now, where's the ignore list? How do you set that?
That's also in the settings.
I think I think that in the sources panel, when you see a stack, you can actually right-click, I think, on an entry in the stack and say like ignore this.
You can also do that, and you can also add folders and files, or use the settings dialog in the DevTools settings, or a framework might already pre-populating that list, because that list, I think we added this as experimental source maps extension or something like that. I need to check how it's actually implemented, and if the framework, like for example Angular, is already supporting that, then you actually don't need to do anything. Then the whole framework code is not going to show up at all.
Yeah, here's one I found. If you do the Command-Shift-P, you get quite a extensive list of different things that you can do. There's one that shows CSS overview.
Oh, yeah.
That's a great panel. And you can see a summary and shows all your background colors being used, text colors, contrasts. You can see in all their codes and what they look like, font info, media queries. Oh my gosh, just the colors and the overview summary is, I can think of many times I've been looking for like browser extensions to find this stuff, and it's already there. Okay, so let's move on to the console. So probably, Dan mentioned debugging by alerts. I think, everybody knows how to do like alert something, I hit my code here. Great. That tells me. I know there's a heck of a lot more you can do with the console. And I have an article bookmarked somewhere about all these different things you can do with the console, like console error and console. I think you can do stack traces, and there's just all kinds of crazy stuff that you can put out in the console that even, breakpoints are awesome, but they don't do everything. And so the console really helps you see some stuff there. Anything else? What can you think about the console? Maybe some hidden gems in there.
So what I find useful in the console is using snippets.
Okay.
Essentially, that you can run code that you have prepared for some tasks in there. What I really find useful in console is the $0 to, I think, 4 or something like that, which give you automatic access to the last selected HTML element. So if you do $0, you get access to the last selected HTML element. That's very useful when if you want to try out something.
One thing that I really love about the console in DevTools is that when you log out elements, it behaves as if you copied something out of the elements view. That you can actually expand them, and you can obviously you can right click on them and go to the elements panel itself, but you can also do a lot of stuff even like in the console with elements as if you're in the elements panel, which is really nice. And I also like the various dollar shortcuts. They're useful. And the one thing that I haven't found very useful, maybe I'm just not using it right, is the ability to watch expressions. I don't know. I've yet to find a really useful use case for that. One thing to watch out for though with the console is if you put in a filter, or if you change the default levels, or if you go into an iframe, then you might suddenly be surprised why you're not seeing things that you expect to see. So,
That's true.
so always be careful about what you put in the filter, and remember to take into account that you're potentially filtering out stuff that you may want to see.
Yeah, that's true. Thank you for saying that. Yeah, it's the console is actually super powerful, and yeah, live expressions. I find them useful when I want to have a live evaluation, a live update when something happens on a page. So if I'm running a console, for example, next to the page, and I do some interactions on the page, then the live expression is going to change depending what the live expression is, for example. But I don't need to go back to the console all the time to issue a new command, but it simply automatically updates.
I do put watches like in the source panel, which kind of do similar thing. I've yet to really find the need for live expressions in the console, but like I said, maybe it's me.
No, it's not every user is going to use all the features. It's often a mix. The watch expressions are great. Same with breakpoints. Sometimes you will not be able to use them properly, and printf debugging is going to be more useful. Yeah.
So a live expression, is that where a value changes as the code is running? It changes right there in the console for you, or how does that work?
You see, Steve, if you go to the console tab, you will see the eye icon.
Oh, right.
And if you click that, it opens up this new line where you can write in an expression.
Oh, okay.
And that expression will update automatically as things change.
Oh, okay. So like a value of a variable maybe, or
yeah, for example, anything really.
That's like a watch. Okay, yeah. The PHP DevTools has in my IDE has a watch thing that just shows,
So it's
as
like I
things change.
said, you have in the sources panel, you have something called watch, which effectively
Right.
does exactly the same thing. It's just on a different panel.
This is just doing it in the console. Okay. Yeah, console log, there's console errors, there's all kinds of stuff you can do.
I like console table, which a lot of people are not familiar with.
Right.
There's
because
also
it prints out everything in a nice little neat table in your dev tool in your console, right?
if your data is appropriately like organized or configured, if it's effectively tabular data, then the table, it can be really useful. I also like using some of the web performance APIs directly from the console. So things like performance get entries, or get entries by name, or get entries by type, are really powerful things to be able to do directly from the console.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember one time, Dan, you and I were talking about promises and going over some of the promises and stuff. You just sit there and worked in the console the entire time. Write out some code, set a variable, run this, run that, and everything was just right in the console.
Yeah, I know that a lot of people like launch Node in the terminal. I just open DevTools and go to the console. I feel right at home there for a lot of these sort of things. So a lot when I want to play with code and like get immediate feedback, the console is often where I like to do it. But for example, one of the things is for example, let's say we mentioned that one of the other tabs that, like Steve, that you talked about as being a really commonly used tab is the network tab. But the problem with the network tab is, let's say I open the page after the page is already loaded, so I kind of miss stuff. But I can use the performance get entries or get entries by type to see network information about things that already happened, even if the DevTools was closed. So that's really useful.
So you just go into the console, open a new line, and type that in, and it shows you.
Yeah, I do
info.
get entries by type resource, and I can see the various resources that downloaded. Now it's not as like visually pleasing to see as the network tab, but it's better than nothing.
Sure. Yeah, I will try to find the that article I used to have bookmarked, or I have bookmarked somewhere, that shows all the different things you can do in the console. It's really amazing. There's more than let's just say there's a lot more than console log.
One of the funny changes that was, well, it's not recent anymore, but it was like this small thing, and it was really helpful, is that const isn't really const in the console anymore. That you can redefine const.
Yeah, I can recall that.
It was such a great thing. It was such a useful thing. It was so small yet so useful, because you would accidentally type const something because you copied some line of code out of somewhere, and then you were kind of screwed because you couldn't change it anymore until you like reloaded the tab or something like that. And now you can effectively just redefine the const. So that's really nice.
All right, so let's move over to the sources tab. That's one of my favorites that I use quite a bit. Now, I do have one question, Michael, before we get started, and I don't know if this is a bug or way things have changed, and maybe it has to do with the source maps discussion that you were talking about. I work mostly in Vue when it comes to the JavaScript on the front end, and it used to be pretty easy to be able to go to my document tree over on the left and find a file and open it, and that was it. Now, I have to use like a debugger line to find it, to try to open the file, because Webpack has created so many different variations, of a particular file, and it's not so easy just to, Command P, type my file name, and open it. Is that something that's changed? Does it have to do with source maps? What do you know? Do you understand what I'm talking about?
Are you talking about files that are ending with a hash?
Yes. Well, yeah, that's what I see is when I go to open them, and I can't find the one that actually is running my, that has my code. So if I put a debugger line in there and run it, then it'll hit that. Okay, that's the one that I want to put my breakpoints in and enter. It's just, it didn't used to be so difficult. So I'm not sure what's changed, if it's a combination of the Vue code or if it's the DevTools or something.
So it's I think it was 1.5 or 2 years ago when we started that. We actually did have a look at the default experience from different popular frameworks, and how the debugging experience is out of the box, essentially. That was enlightening and very interesting, and we found bugs in Chrome DevTools that we addressed, but we also found enhancements that frameworks can be doing in order to provide essentially better information or something like that, so the default debugging experience is better. I think we also, so I can recall that particular issue, for example, with the hashes, because again, same thing. Hey, now the hot model reloading kicked in, and now I have 5 files with the same name but different hashes. Which one is the last one? I don't care about anything else anyway. And some fixes have been made. I would need to check if that affected Vue. I think it has, because then it also depends what version of Vue you're actually running and so on.
So a question about that: do you actually work with the framework makers directly? Like, if let's say you say, "Hey, we think that Vue could be doing something a bit differently, and that would really improve the integration." Do you actually reach out to the Vue contributors and suggest a change to them? How does it work?
Short answer to that question: yes, that's what we're doing. So we obviously can't fix everything ourselves, be it because we don't have the know-how, or we don't have the capacity, or we don't have control over the source code. So we need to work with partners like Vue, like React, like Angular, and so on, to get a better experience to our users. So yes, we are reaching out to them and ask them, hey, we have seen that. Can you add that? Or, hey, we are really interested in making the experience for React users better. What are the top issues that they see when they're debugging, and how can we help there? And so on.
Now, one of my favorite features in Chrome DevTools, and it's part of the sources panel, is the overrides aspect. For those of you who don't know, overrides mean that you can effectively edit the file and save a local copy of the edited file, so that then even if you reload the page, it will use your edited changes. And it's a really cool way of trying out a fix without having to redeploy a new version. Of course, there are problems with it. I mean, bundlers get in the way. If your code is bundled, then editing it can be, editing. Let's say editing the minified bundle code is a lot less fun. It's doable, and I've done it, but it's a lot less fun. So that's one option. I've even done like crazy things, like copy the non-minified version and paste it over the entire file, and then edit that and save it into the overrides. But when you can get them to work, overrides are immensely powerful feature. One thing that I would have liked, which is kind of similar to overrides, would have been the ability to redirect. Say, instead of download the file from this URL, behave as if you're downloading the file from this URL, but actually download it from a different URL, like what you might get with certain local proxies.
Right. Okay. So yes, override is a great feature. Network overrides and local overrides. And we also did actually spend a few cycles to improve it end of last year, I think.
Yeah, the timing, the load timing, I think you improved, that it behaves as if it's not local but downloads over the net from the network.
Yeah, and also we also did some UI changes with local overrides, I think, because it was hard. It's a super useful feature, super hard to find if you don't know where you're looking, or you might find if somebody else that's already know about this is going to tell you about that. Which is,
are you familiar with it, by the way, Steve, with the overrides feature?
No, I haven't used it before. I've seen something similar. I remember Chris Coyer a few years ago from CSS Tricks and CodePen and Shop Talk Show did a video about making your CSS local, so you can change it and tweak it. If you're working like a remote site, and you can tweak it actually locally, which I thought was awesome. This sounds familiar, although the question I have for you, Dan, is how is using the overrides panel within the DevTools different? Say if I'm working locally, right, and I'm editing code in my IDE, and I change that, and the hot module reload happens. What's the difference?
Obviously, if you have hot reload with actual debugging, local debugging, that's the better option.
Okay.
But let's say you've got it already shipped in production, let's say, and you're thinking, hey, yeah, I think we could do X better if we do this instead of that. But you don't want to be, instead of firing up the development environment and starting and doing like that way, you just open it up to the override and test and effectively test your change in production.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, that's nice.
And for example, I did a workshop like once, I remember, and instead of having people like install a whole development environment, I created a website with like some demo code, and we basically worked together by overriding it with more and more sophisticated versions. So they actually used Chrome DevTools as their development environment, creating overrides.
And the the sibling of override is the workspace feature. So if you actually have access to the source code and you want to keep on hacking in DevTools because you want to make small changes and stuff like that, you can use workspace to actually hook up to your file system and make a link to your actual source code. And
yeah,
then
so
you can change
that's really about using the DevTools effectively as your development environment, effectively.
So what is it doing? It's creating a local copy within the browser there, and then you're tweaking
No,
that.
No, it's really mapping to your actual code. Think about, instead of using VS Code for your coding, using Chrome DevTools for your coding.
Yeah.
Okay, so if I add a folder, I'm adding it, so I can do that on my prod site, my whatever .com, and it's actually connecting with that code, that's bundled code that's running on my server.
Well, that's if your server is local or accessible via the file system.
Okay. So then, but you were talking about using the Chrome DevTools like as your workspace to check against prod. How does that work? I guess that's what I'm trying. Is that what you're talking about?
So we're saying that there are two different features which are related. One is a feature called overrides, and the other called a feature called workspace. Workspace is about mapping your actual development workspace into DevTools,
Okay.
so that when you make changes, you're actually making changes in your original code files.
Okay.
Override is a feature that lets you override the file. The file coming from the server remains the same, but you're creating like a local copy that the browser uses instead.
Gotcha. Nice. I like
very
that.
nicely summarized. Yes.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, the classic case that comes to mind is, hey, it works on local, but why isn't it working on prod? As a way to
I also see it like if you, for example, if you are offering a library, for example, and they need to debug why it's not working on the client side, you will not have access to the client source code, but you still need to debug it. So with overrides, you can actually try out fixes and stuff like that in the production environment. It's very useful for prod debugging. Very useful.
That's cool. Okay, learn something new every day. All right, now the other thing that I want to talk about in this DevTools environment, we're running out of time here, is breakpoints, just because they are so incredibly useful. The ways I use them, and I'm sure I don't come close to maxing them out, is the way they could be. And they work pretty much the same as they do in my PHP IDE. Is one, obviously just to stop code and see what's the value of certain variables at a certain point. If you're in a loop, you're in a function, whatever, that's probably the most useful thing. Sometimes, but I know there's other things where you can edit the breakpoints and set conditions. Whether it's only hit this breakpoint if this variable has a specific value, because you're inside of a monster loop and you don't want to stop every single time. Or you can, just temporarily disable it instead of removing it. There's all kinds of conditions. If you right click on a breakpoint and edit it, you can see all the different options. But it's a lot more useful than just click it. Okay, it's going to stop every time it runs here. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, conditional breakpoints are very useful. There's also the option of log points, which is it's also instead of breaking, it just logs something to the console. You could do it in the old days by just creating a condition with a console log in it, but I guess that a lot of people just didn't think about that trick. So, so yeah. But it's useful because something you just want to like you think it would have been really useful if I had this log statement, but I don't have it in the code, so I'll just add it as a logs option.
Or if you're doing prod debugging again, where you can't change the source code, except if you're overriding, but that might not for some reason not working, so you can do a log point, and it's like a printf.
Or can you actually even change local variables in kind of like this log point, like effectively add some logic in a log point?
Yeah, you can add an expression in there. I think it needs to be side effect free or something like that, or I might be mixing that up, but you can add an expression.
That's interesting. One more thing that it's worthwhile mentioning about breakpoints is that sometimes you have like a complex line with multiple instructions on it. If you put a breakpoint, you will actually see that there are small arrows inside the line itself, and you can actually turn on and off breakpoints inside the line.
Yep. Welcome to JavaScript.
Well, that's true even from the C days, you know.
I know. But why is it it gets super interesting is when you have minimizers at work and bundlers, everything gets crammed together into one line to squeeze out as many bytes as possible.
Yeah, that's kind of why I think DHH is now trying to get us all to just work in the original source code without minifiers and basically rely on the compression and not on the minification for to and there's a lot of truth in that in a lot of ways, but he's trying to take it even a step further and trying to convince us not to use bundlers, and we're not there yet.
All right. So finally, we want to go to talk about the network tab, and there's a lot you can see on your network tab in terms of basically all the files that are being downloaded as XHR requests that are being made. There's all kinds of information. My primary use of them, where I'm dealing with a front end framework that's communicating over APIs to a back end, is to see, okay, what calls were made, what was the payload, what was the response? Was it an error code? Was it an error within the return JSON or the return whatever the response is, etc. So that's my primary use. I'll usually have, for instance, you can filter all the different items that are written to the console log. I usually have my fetch / XHR button enabled just so I can just see the traffic going back and forth. But you can see CSS files that are downloaded, JS files, font, images, etc. Sizes, how long they took, and so on. So and then you even have filter capabilities. So if you have a huge console, you can just type in and filter, and pretty standard stuff. What other stuff can you do in the network tab that I haven't touched on?
So what I see that's heavily utilized and also controversial, if most people are setting it on or off, is disable cache, for example.
Yes.
So we see people are running quite often either having it enabled, so cache is always disabled, or disabled. And yeah, why is this useful? That's useful if you want to debug a code load of a website, for example, or if you're interested in performance debugging where you want to replicate similar situation and so on. In particular, in performance cases, disabled cache is quite often heavily used.
Just a comment on that, as somebody who's really into performance, it's important to understand that while disabling cache is the easiest way to simulate the first load, it's not really the same, because in the first load, you're starting with an empty cache, that's true, but cache is not disabled. So if you have things like prefetches and preloads, disable cache kind of kills them, whereas in the normal flow of things, they do work. So disable cache, like I said, is the easiest way to simulate the first load, but it's not the same as the first load. If you want to do that, you probably want to do like create a special profile or even use the incognito, whatever. That would be potentially a better simulation.
Yes, that's true. It's for users it's often about ergonomics, because when they get 80% there, it's often quite fine enough. Similarly, also going into with the emulation of the different network conditions, that's also very often being used, like the throttling feature, for example, that we see.
The throttling feature?
Yeah.
Okay, right. So in other words, as I understand it, that's, if you're working on a, 100 gigabit connection on a very fast computer, you're going to think, hey, everything is great. But then if someone gets out there, in a remote location where they have 3G or, something really slow, you're not going to be able to see what those effects are. And so what this allows you to do is throttle down your connection so that you can emulate as best possible a much slower connection to see how your code loads and performs.
Right. But keep in mind that's only an emulation. And as Dan already said, it's same with disable cache, that's only emulating. It's not 100% how it actually would be, but it's close enough for at least to debug such cases and to understand what's actually happening and how and see how slow your web page, for example, would load on a 3G connection.
Right. It's the best. Well, any emulation is never going to be perfect. So I think that goes without saying, but it can certainly get you a lot closer.
One configuration that I often like to change when I'm using the network tab is I actually prefer color-coded resources. So the bars in the waterfall part of the network actually, like, they show you, they're like the green for the time to first byte, and then and blue for the actual byte downloads. But instead, you can go to the general settings, and in the network section, you can change to color code the resources. And if you do that, then instead of all the resources being shown in like, green and blue, you'll actually see the JavaScript in yellow and the fonts in red and CSS in purple and HTML in like blue. And it's much easier to identify various different resources this way. That's what the only downside of that, and I've complained to you guys, Michael, about it, is that when you do that, you don't actually see the DNS times and the TCP handshake times. So you kind of you either see this or you see that. You can't see them together, which is kind of unfortunate. In an ideal world, I would like to you have it color coded and still be able to see the TCP time and the DNS time.
Right. Have you created an issue for that?
I think I did.
Okay.
like a long time ago.
Okay. I need to check. That's interesting. One other thing that might also be useful, in particular for performance debugging, is also if you are capturing screenshots. So similar to the how the performance panel typically works, where it's capturing screenshots and show you how the page actually looks at a certain point in time. You can also do the same thing for the network on the network panel and let it capture screenshots, which helps if you want to understand how the page is actually visually loading.
So if I go to the Performance tab, I see the Screenshots checkbox. You said it's on the Network tab as well?
Yeah, there's the network on the top right has the ski icon. You can click on that, and then you will get some additional settings.
Oh, okay. More tools. Oh, yes. Recorder, rendering. Okay. Yes, I see those 3 little dots there under more tools. There's quite a long list of more tools. We could probably spend a few hours going over all these tools. That's for sure. But we don't have a few hours, so we're going to wrap it up for here and move on to picks. Thank you, Michael, for coming. This is one of my favorite topics to discuss. And
Thank you for having me.
the more you understand the debugging tools you have, the better you can do at writing your code. Or in Dan's favorite subject, you can make it more performant.
We didn't even get to the various performance tabs. Like there are like 3 or 4 different tabs just for performance, and we didn't even talk about them.
Right. We might have to have Michael back to cover more of this stuff for sure. We do have, we'll put this in the show notes, the link to the list of YouTube videos on what's new in DevTools. I have found something to take up a large part of my afternoon for a while to catch up on these videos for sure. Who is that that's doing them? It looks like the same person.
Yeah, it's Jesslyn, our DevRel person that's mainly doing them. I think she's teaming up then with colleagues of her. But it's mainly Jesslyn.
Okay. Alrighty. So with that, we'll move on to picks. Picks are the part of the show where we get to talk about something other than code, or we can talk about code if we want. All depends. Dan, what do you got for us?
Well, not a lot this time, so I'll refrain from talking about the various wars that are going on in Ukraine and Israel because it's just too unfortunate and sad, and I don't feel like it. So instead, I'll mention a nice TV show that I'm kind of enjoying, which is called Killing Eve. It's on Netflix.
Sounds very pleasant.
Yeah, it's about this. It's like a woman-led TV show. So there are 2 like I would say main figures there. One is this kind of wacko um, hit person for some clandestine organization. It's unclear for whom, and she's basically a psychopath, but they're taking advantage of that and using her as a hit person. And then there's the MI6 agent who's trying to hunt her, which is the other lead female figure in the show. And it's really interesting, and I'm it's not an amazing TV show, but it's a really enjoyable one, and I'm liking it.
Awesome.
So those would be my picks for today. And unfortunately, I actually have to drop off. So Michael, I really enjoyed our conversation today, and hopefully we can have you on the show again to talk about more Chrome DevTools features, because I think we talked about less than half the panels. So
I think it was a quarter of them.
Yeah, and we didn't even get to the drawer at the bottom and all the options that are there. So there's a lot more to talk about. So guys, thank you for having me, and Michael, thank you for coming on, and I'll see you next time. Bye.
Shalom.
Okay.
Thank
See
you.
you.
All right, so my turn. Before I get to the high point of every episode, which are the dad jokes, I do have one pick. One of the ways I do my working out exercises with CrossFit, and no, I'm not one of those CrossFit people that always has to blab about me doing CrossFit. But there's this one piece of equipment that I have started using recently that has been a lifesaver, or rather hand saver. So part of CrossFit is doing a lot on bar. So whether it's like pull-ups, bar muscle ups, toes to bar, that kind of stuff, bars can really, 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 really tear up your hands. I've had that happen a few times. And so there's a company called Victory Grips. They make these grips that are various kinds. The ones I use are these leather ones. And what they do is they strap around your wrist, and then it only has material right there in the palm of your hand. It's not like a glove or something that goes over your hand. And so then what you can do is you can just use them while you're holding onto the bar and doing whatever you're doing. and then you can spin them around so they get out of the way for, whatever else you're doing that you don't want them in the way, and then you can just put them back in place. But they give you a really good grip. A lot of bars tend to be really slick, and it's really hard to do those kinds of workouts when you're trying to do a pull-up but your hand's slipping, so you're trying to get a grip half the time and wasting half your energy. So, but they're at victorygrips.com, and they got some really great things. Even with them on, I've sort of torn up my hands a little time, but far less than if I didn't use the grips at all. And then finally, the dad jokes of the week. So I went out to dinner recently, and the server said to me, there was refill your glass with water, and they said, "I see your glass is empty, sir. Would you like another one?" And I said, "Why would I want 2 empty glasses?" Right? As compared to a full one. Question. So why did the vulture get kicked off of the airplane? People kept complaining about his carry-on luggage. Carrion, for those who don't get it. And then finally, this one, I saw this, as soon as I saw this topic, I go, this one is just perfect. So I went to my boss and I said, "What web browser do you use?" He said, "I use Chrome." I said, "Why does everybody on the team say you're always on Edge?"
Oh my God.
Very good. Very good. I figured that was appropriate for today. All right. So that's all I have. Michael, do you have any picks for us?
Okay. So I like playing board games. And I think I have one favorite game, which is called Spirit Island. So imagine instead of you colonizing an island and then building a nice city there, imagine you are actually playing the island and you are not very eager of being colonized. So you're playing a spirit on that island that tries to defy the invaders, which is a great cooperative, super complex board game that my wife and I really enjoy playing together.
So you're playing, so the other players you're playing as a team as compared to playing against yourself, against each other?
Correct. Right, so you try to defy the invaders, and they're always and they have different spirits with different powers and so on, with different complexity. And I always wanted, like, it would be cool if you would play something like Godzilla or something like that, like wandering over the island and then simply traveling everything. And like a few months ago, actually, they released an expansion, and they had essentially Godzilla in there. It is a turtle, but it's like Godzilla. It really feels that way. Like you are trampling over villages and destroy them because that's what Godzilla is doing. And I was like, you really nailed it. And really liked that.
Spirit Island. That's I've seen some other games. There's another game I played, and I forget what it's called, where it's like the island is sinking and you're trying to get off of it. It's another team game. I have a neighbor who plays a lot of these types of games, so I'll have to ask him about this one. But yeah, it's Board Game Geek. I'm not sure what the rating is, but there's a page there for sure. Excellent. All right, Michael. Well, thank you for coming on. It sounds like we do need to have you back to talk about more of the dev tools, considering, at least for myself, they're sort of an integral part of web development.
I think so. Love to.
All right. Thank you. And we will talk to everybody next time on JavaScript Jabber. Adios.